As the years go by, something deep within us begins to change. We stop chasing noise and start craving peace. We no longer desire to impress everyone, we simply long to rest in truth. But in this sacred season of life, just when we think we've earned the right to breathe freely, an old voice creeps in. Not a scream, not an argument, just a sigh. A passive comment, a silence that weighs heavy. And suddenly, we feel guilty for choosing peace. This is the quiet trap of the guilt tripper, the one who wraps control in concern, the one who uses emotional weight instead of honest words. They don't confront you head on. Instead, they withdraw affection. They speak in half sentences. They imply rather than declare. And worst of all, they often carry your last name. They say things like, "I guess I'll figure it out myself." Or, "After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me." And if you're not discerning, you'll start to shrink, not because they shouted at you, but because they made you question your heart. But hear me clearly today, your life is not a debt. You do not owe anyone an explanation for choosing rest. You do not owe anyone access to your time, your energy, or your soul just because they're related to you. The love of Christ does not come with guilt attached. And anyone who tries to guilt you into giving what you no longer have is not walking in love. They are walking in control. The sad reality is that guilt trippers often look like caregivers. They say things that sound like concern, but smell like shame. And if you've lived long enough, you know exactly what I mean. That unspoken expectation that you're supposed to say yes every time. That you're selfish if you put yourself first. That your peace must always be postponed for someone else's comfort. But that's not what God wants for you in your later years. That's not what Christ modeled when he stepped away from the crowds, when he went to quiet places to pray, to restore, to rest. You've spent a lifetime being there for everyone else, raising children, supporting friends, carrying burdens that weren't even yours. Now, in this sacred chapter, it's time to reclaim your right to breathe. Not out of rebellion, not out of anger, but out of truth. Because anyone who loves you truly will not guilt you into submission, they will free you into peace. And if you feel tired after every conversation with them, if their love feels like a leash, not a hug, it's time to look closer, not to hate, not to push them away in bitterness, but to guard your soul with wisdom. Because guilt is not a fruit of the Spirit. Peace is. Let's be honest, guilt doesn't always come with harsh words. Sometimes it shows up as a disappointed sigh, a long pause, a sentence left hanging just long enough to make you second-guess yourself. Well, I suppose I'll figure it out alone, or I would have done it for you. These aren't just words. They are carefully packaged weapons meant to chip away at your confidence until you begin to believe the lie. Maybe I really am being selfish, but let me remind you, peace is not selfish. It is not a luxury. It is not something you have to earn. Peace is your inheritance, and guilt trippers are robbers of that inheritance. They know how to twist the narrative. Suddenly, your no becomes proof that you're ungrateful. Your boundaries become evidence that you're uncaring. And if you're not careful, your golden years become filled with regret, not because you did wrong, but because you allowed someone else to define what love should look like. But real love does not manipulate. Real love does not make you question your worth every time you stand up for yourself. Real love does not make you feel small or ashamed or emotionally indebted. In fact, 1 Corinthians 13 says love is patient. Love is kind. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. But guilt trippers. They keep records. They bring up things from 20 years ago. They make you feel like every act of kindness must be repaid with your time, your energy, your compliance. And here's the worst part. The more you give in to them, the more they demand. You become stuck in a cycle. Give, feel guilty. Give more, feel emptier. And at some point, your soul begins to whisper, "This isn't love." And it's not. It's emotional bondage. You may be thinking, but this is my child, my sibling, my lifelong friend. I know. That's what makes it so painful. That's why it cuts deeper. But the truth remains, familiarity does not equal righteousness. Just because someone has known you the longest doesn't mean they deserve unlimited access to your peace. In this season of life, your health is holy, your time is precious, and your spirit is tender. You don't have decades left to keep giving what drains you. You have the right to guard your heart, to protect your mind, and to say no more without explanation. So if someone in your life is using guilt as a leash, it's time to step back. Not because you don't love them, but because you finally love you enough to stop. You've spent a lifetime giving love, giving time, giving effort, often putting yourself last so others could come first. And while there is honor in that, there is also danger when giving becomes a prison. Because guilt trippers don't just take your time, they take your identity. They reshape how you see yourself. And they do it so subtly that you don't even realize it until you no longer recognize your own voice. You begin to question, am I really doing enough? Should I have said yes? Am I the one who's selfish? Or are they just manipulating my kindness? That's how they win, by making you believe that saying yes to yourself is a betrayal. But let me be clear, choosing peace is not betrayal. It is alignment with your God-given dignity. Jesus himself withdrew from the crowds. He stepped away to pray. He said no to certain requests, not because he lacked love, but because he had clarity. He understood the value of staying in tune with the Father, more than pleasing every voice around him. In your later years, that clarity must become your compass. You don't have time to live under someone else's emotional weather system. You've already walked through too many storms to now live under someone else's clouds. Here's what freedom sounds like. I'm no longer apologizing for needing rest. I love you, but I can't do that for you. My peace matters too. You see, freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers boundaries. Sometimes it's a quiet, no spoken with firm resolve. And sometimes it's just stepping away without drama, without shouting, without guilt. There are people in your life who may never understand why you pulled back. They may call you distant, cold, selfish, but their confusion is not your responsibility. Their discomfort is not your burden. Your only responsibility is to protect the sacred peace God has given you. Because guilt is a thief. It steals joy. It steals clarity. It steals the final years of life that were meant to be lived in freedom. So let today be the day you reclaim your spirit from guilt. Let today be the day you say, No more invisible chains. No more quiet resentment. No more smiling through emotional manipulation. Let today be the day you say yes to yourself without explanation. You are not being unkind. You are being free. And freedom, especially in this season of life, is a gift too valuable to waste. So if someone calls your boundaries a betrayal, let them. If someone tries to shame your peace, let them talk. Because at the end of your life, it's not their approval that will matter. It's the condition of your soul. And that, beloved, is worth protecting no matter who disagrees. There's a heaviness some people carry, not on their backs, but in their words, a cloud that follows them everywhere they go. It doesn't matter how sunny the day is, how peaceful the room feels, or how good the moment could be, they always find a reason to complain. And if you're not careful, they'll pull you under that cloud with them. These are the constant complainers. People whose default setting is discontent. And here's what makes it so dangerous. In your later years, you no longer have the energy to waste on problems that aren't yours. In your youth, maybe you had the strength to absorb all that noise. Maybe you had the time, the patience, the emotional reserves to sit and listen to hours of complaints that led nowhere. But now your energy is sacred. Your emotional space is holy ground, and not everyone deserves access to it. Complainers rarely come asking questions. They don't want advice. They don't want growth. They want to dump. They want to vent. They want to spill all of their chaos onto your clean floor and walk out feeling lighter while you're left sweeping up the mess. One conversation, one phone call, one visit, and suddenly you feel irritated, anxious, and you're not even sure why. That's the invisible cost of negativity. It doesn't hit you all at once, it seeps into your soul. You start the day with peace, but after just 10 minutes with them, everything feels heavy. They complain about the weather, the government, the neighbors, their health, your decisions. Nothing is ever good enough. Nothing is ever light. And if you spend enough time with them, you begin to adopt their lens without even knowing it. You start seeing through their bitterness instead of through your blessing. You start expecting disappointment. You start questioning your joy. Their storm becomes your atmosphere. And here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud that's spiritual pollution. Just like secondhand smoke damages lungs that didn't light the cigarette, secondhand negativity damages spirits that didn't choose the attitude. In this chapter of life, you must learn to guard your emotional oxygen. Because joy doesn't come easy anymore. It's something you fight for. Peace isn't automatic. It's a garden you cultivate with intention. And negativity. It's a weed that grows fast and chokes everything good. So when you find yourself around someone who always finds the problem, never the beauty, don't just endure it. Notice it. Acknowledge it. And if necessary, create space. Because your emotional freedom is too precious to let someone else's bitterness bury it. Title: When Negativity Becomes Contagious. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling smaller than when it began? Like someone didn't just speak to you, but emptied themselves onto you and left you to carry it. That's what constant complainers do. They transfer their emotional load onto anyone who will stand still long enough to listen. Not to heal, but to offload. And the danger, it's not always obvious. They don't come with shouts. They don't argue. They don't attack. They slowly bleed out their frustration into your ears. and watch as your light dims without ever noticing. You may think I'm strong enough to handle this, but over time, something shifts. You start to see life through their complaints. You begin expecting disappointment before it even comes. You carry a heaviness that doesn't belong to you. And here's the truth: what you allow to surround you will eventually shape you. Proverbs 13:20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." That principle doesn't just apply to actions, it applies to attitudes. You weren't created to be someone's emotional landfill. Your heart is not a dumping ground. Your mind is not a container for complaints. Your spirit is not a sponge for bitterness. Yes, you can love people. Yes, you can listen when they're hurting. But there's a difference between compassion and compromise, between bearing one another's burdens and being buried under someone else's refusal to grow. And that's the real issue with chronic complainers. They don't want solutions. They reject change. They push away joy, because their identity is built around what's wrong, what's unfair, what's broken. They cling to their pain like it's a trophy. And if you stay too close for too long, they'll convince you to see life the same way. They don't just drain you, they begin to redefine you. And what's worse, many of them never even ask how you're doing. You could be silently suffering, but all they see is an audience. You could be holding pain in your chest, but they only want to talk about the cloud hanging over their day. They don't check on your soul, they just consume your space. So let me say something you may need to hear today. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to say, "I love you, but I can't carry this today." That is not rude. That is not unkind. That is wisdom. Because not everyone who has access to your phone should have access to your spirit. And not everyone who's been around the longest deserves to remain if they refuse to speak life. There comes a time in life where you stop apologizing for protecting your peace. Not because you've become cold or distant, but because you've finally understood not every voice deserves a seat at the table of your soul, especially the voices that only bring complaints and criticism. You've weathered too many storms. You've carried too many burdens. You've poured yourself out for family, for friends, for strangers. And now you've earned the right to guard what's left, not with fear, but with wisdom. Constant complainers don't just complain about life, they slowly convince you that life isn't worth celebrating. They poke holes in your hope. They minimize your joy. And if you allow them too close, they'll turn your sanctuary into a battlefield of negativity. And that's not what this season is for. This season is for healing, for slowing down and breathing deeply, for mornings of gratitude and nights of reflection, for walking in the garden of peace, not being dragged through someone else's storm. You were not meant to spend your golden years entangled in emotional noise. You don't need to keep explaining why you're unavailable, why you didn't answer the phone, why you chose rest over another 2-hour complaint session. You are not a crisis hotline. You are not someone's therapist. You are not responsible for fixing someone's refusal to find joy. Yes, you care. Yes, you love. But real love is not measured by how much pain you're willing to absorb. It's measured by how much truth you're willing to live. And sometimes the greatest truth you can live is this: I refuse to shrink in someone else's shadow. So when they call you selfish for stepping away, don't flinch. When they try to guilt you for choosing stillness over their spiral, stand firm. When they say, "You've changed," smile and say, "Thank God I did." Because growth means recognizing the difference between carrying someone through a season and being dragged by someone who refuses to walk. You were created to flourish, to laugh, to find joy in the little things again. You're not here to absorb someone else's bitterness day after day until it poisons your spirit. You deserve relationships that feel like sunlight, not storms. Conversations that give you strength, not steal it. People who ask how you're doing before unloading how they feel. So if your peace matters, and it does, then let this be your boundary. No more dumping grounds, no more emotional leeches, no more joy thieves. You don't owe everyone access. You owe God your faithfulness, and you owe yourself a future filled with light. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those you've helped the most. Those who know exactly how soft your heart is, how deep your generosity runs, and how rarely you say no. They don't come to give, to check in, to ask how you're doing. They come to take again and again, because they've learned one thing about you: you're always available. These are the users, not in the obvious sense. They don't always shout or demand, but their pattern is clear. They show up when they're in need and disappear the moment you're no longer useful. It starts small: a favor here, a quick loan there, a ride, a handout, a listening ear. You tell yourself it's love. After all, isn't that what family does? Isn't that what friends are for? But over time, something shifts. You begin to feel like a convenience store open when they're desperate, forgotten, when they're full. And here's the truth that stings being needed is not the same as being loved. You can be someone's first call in crisis and still never cross their mind in peace. You can carry someone through their worst moment and they'll still leave you empty the moment they get what they came for. That's not love. That's transactional affection. It's conditional presence. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake usefulness for intimacy. You'll start thinking their dependence is a form of devotion. You'll convince yourself they must care, they keep coming to me. But users don't come because they care. They come because they know you will. And each time they take a little more. Not just time, not just money, but your energy, your patience, your peace. You go to sleep tired and wake up anxious, not because your life is full, but because it's been invaded by people who only show up with their hands out. And then comes the guilt. Because when you finally say no, when you finally take a step back, they act shocked, offended, betrayed, as if your existence was created solely for their convenience. And for a moment, you doubt yourself. You wonder if maybe you are being harsh, if maybe you've forgotten how to love. But no, beloved, what you've remembered is how to live. You're not here to be an emotional ATM. You're not obligated to fund everyone's crisis. You're not selfish for protecting what little strength you have left. You're wise. You're faithful. You're finally seeing clearly. Because love does not take without giving. It does not vanish once needs are met. It does not return only when there's something to gain. So when you recognize a user, don't just forgive them, free yourself from their cycle. One of the most difficult lessons in life, especially in your later years, is realizing that some people never saw you as a person. They saw you as a provider. Not someone to cherish, but someone to use. And what makes this so painful is that the users are often the ones you loved the deepest. You gave to them when it hurt. You sacrificed not because you had extra, but because you cared. You gave your time, your money, your presence, not for praise, but because it's who you are. But here's what hurts the most when they disappear the moment your giving stops. They don't call just to talk. They don't check in unless they want something. They don't show up unless there's a withdrawal to be made from the bank of your kindness. And when you finally pause, when you take a breath and say, "I don't have it in me this time," they act like you've betrayed them. They twist the story. They make you the villain. They say you've changed as if change isn't what maturity requires. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer easy to use. Let that truth settle in. You were never meant to be someone's emergency plan. God didn't create you to be a backup. He didn't bless you so others could exploit you. He didn't fill your heart with love so others could drain it without giving any back. And the longer you let users stay close, the more they erode your worth. You start feeling guilty for resting. You second-guess your right to say no. You question your boundaries as if they're sins. But boundaries are not a lack of love. They're a sign of wisdom. They protect what is holy in you. And your energy, your peace, your spiritual clarity, those are holy. Let me tell you this. Plainly, you do not have to apologize for being unavailable to people who were never present for you emotionally. You don't owe constant access to anyone who disappears once they're satisfied. You don't need to explain why your kindness now has limits, because true love doesn't wait until it needs something. It's there in the silence. It's there in the quiet seasons. It's there even when you have nothing left to give. And if someone only comes around when their life falls apart, but never when yours does, they're not family. They're opportunists. So let this be the season where you stop confusing guilt with grace, where you stop calling it compassion when it's really depletion, where you stop holding doors open for people who never plan to stay. You are not cold for protecting your heart. You are not bitter for guarding your time. You are simply becoming free. There is a sacred strength that comes with age, a strength not measured by how much you can carry, but by what you finally refuse to carry anymore. And for many of us, that begins with one word: no. No, I'm not available. No, I can't help this time. No, I'm not giving out parts of myself to people who only show up with empty hands and full expectations. And at first, saying no feels wrong. It feels like you're turning your back on people. It feels like a betrayal. But in reality, you're not betraying them. You're finally being loyal to yourself. And that's long overdue. You see, users aren't always villains. They don't always come with malice. Some are your own children, friends you've loved for decades, relatives you've held close for a lifetime. But here's the truth. No one likes to admit some people confuse your kindness with obligation. They've grown so used to you saying yes that your no feels like punishment. They've gotten so comfortable with taking that when you stop, they claim you've changed. And maybe you have. Maybe that's the best news you could receive. Because change is growth. And in this season of your life, growth means setting sacred boundaries. You're no longer in a place where you can afford to be drained by one-way relationships. You don't have endless energy to pour into people who never pour back. You're not interested in applause anymore. You're interested in peace. Real, sustainable, God-given peace. You've already given more than most. You've paid your dues. You've served, supported, and stayed through storms that no one else saw. But now is the time to receive. To let love come back to you. To let relationships flow in both directions. And to finally understand that love without reciprocity is not love, it's labor. And you are not an employee of other people's emergencies. It's not cruel to say, I'm done being used. It's holy. It's healing. It's necessary. So when they say you've grown cold, stay warm in your truth. When they accuse you of being selfish, rest in the clarity that self-respect is not a sin. When they walk away because you're no longer useful, let them go and watch how light your soul becomes without their weight. Because in the end, you were never called to be everyone's answer. You were called to be whole. And wholeness begins when you stop giving out pieces of yourself to people who only show up to take. You are not selfish. You are not harsh. You are finally free. There's a unique kind of pain that comes not from strangers or enemies, but from people who love you, yet can't let go of control. As you get older, you begin to see it more clearly. Those who say, I'm just looking out for you, or I know what's best, but what they really mean is, I don't trust your choices anymore. These are the controllers, and they can be difficult to recognize at first because their language is wrapped in concern. Their tone is soft. Their words sound like protection. But if you listen carefully, if you look beneath the surface, you'll see something else: fear. Not fear for your safety, fear of losing control over you. And that fear, it disguises itself as guidance. It sounds like advice. It dresses itself in wisdom. But it's not guidance, it's domination in disguise. You say, I'm thinking of moving to a quieter place. And they say, that's not safe at your age. You say, I want to give more away, and they say, what if you need that later? You talk about doing something new, and they respond with hesitation, concern, or outright dismissal. It's subtle, but it's suffocating. Because slowly, your world starts to shrink. Not because you've lost your strength, but because someone else convinced you that you don't know what's best for your own life anymore. But let me speak this over you today. You are not too old to decide. You are not too weak to lead. You are not too fragile to live. You've lived through more than most people can even imagine. You've overcome decades of trial, triumph, grief, and growth. You've earned the right to trust your voice, even when others don't. Controllers want you to believe that independence is dangerous, but what they're really afraid of is your autonomy. Because when you stop asking for permission, you start living in freedom. And when you start living in freedom, they lose their power. And that's when the manipulation begins. They may not yell, they may not argue, but their disapproval is loud. Their passive pressure is constant, and their doubts creep into your spirit like vines slowly choking your clarity. But hear me now. This is your life, not theirs. This is your season to walk boldly in what God has placed on your heart, to make decisions not out of fear, but out of faith, to act not for their comfort, but for your calling. You don't need to be managed. You need to be trusted. You don't need a warden. You need partners who walk beside you, not above you. So when the controllers start tightening their grip, let that be your sign. It's time to lift your voice, reclaim your ground, and live unshaken. Sometimes the most controlling people aren't the loudest, they're the most familiar. A spouse who finishes your sentences and rewrites your decisions. A child who talks over your preferences in the name of helping. A friend who questions every plan you make, cloaking their concern in smiles and subtle comments. And because their voice is familiar, because their care once felt genuine, you don't realize what's happening until you feel small in your own life. Controllers are rarely aggressive in old age. They've learned how to manipulate gently. They won't tell you what to do outright, but they'll make you feel foolish if you choose differently. They won't forbid you, but they'll worry you into submission. And before long, you start second-guessing what God already placed in your heart. You say, "I want to try something new." And they say, "Are you sure at your age?" You say, "I want to downsize and simplify." And they say, "You're not thinking clearly." You say, "I feel peace about this." And they respond with doubt, hesitation, or a list of reasons to wait. It doesn't come with malice. It comes with fear. But that fear is no less damaging when it becomes the voice you begin to obey more than your own. Let me say this with love and clarity. You are not someone to be handled. You are someone to be heard. And if a person can't respect your mind, they don't deserve control over your path. God has brought you through too much to let someone else write the final chapters of your story. You have the Holy Spirit. You have wisdom. You have years of experience. And if anyone thinks that age equals incompetence, they're not seeing through spiritual eyes. They're operating through pride or fear. Yes, we all need help at times. We need people to walk with us, encourage us, support us. But help is not the same as control. Help says, "How can I serve your vision?" Control says, "Here's what I think your vision should be." Help empowers. Control limits. Help builds trust. Control builds cages. If someone in your life becomes offended when you disagree, when you make decisions on your own, when you speak your truth with confidence, they're not helping. They're managing. And you were never meant to be managed. You were meant to live, to decide, to walk with God as your shepherd, not with another human being as your master. So if you've been silencing your voice to keep the peace, if you've been shrinking your dreams to make someone else feel secure, it's time to break free. This season is not for permission, it's for purpose. And anyone who cannot honor your God-given voice is not walking in love. They're walking in fear. In this season of your life, you don't need someone hovering over your shoulder. You don't need to explain every decision, justify every preference, or tiptoe around the expectations of those who want to shape you into what makes them feel comfortable. You've earned the right to live in your truth. Controllers will say, "They're just concerned." They'll say, "I'm only trying to protect you." But protection that strips you of dignity isn't love, it's fear. And fear has no place in relationships that are meant to breathe life. The Bible says in 2 Timothy 1-7, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind." Let that truth settle in your soul. You have power to decide. You have love to give and to receive freely. You have a sound mind to discern what's right for your life. Anyone who questions that, undermines that, or consistently speaks against that is not operating in the Spirit of God. They're operating in the spirit of control. Now I know it's not easy. It's hard when the controller is your child. It's painful when it's your spouse. It's confusing when it's someone you once depended on for guidance. But relationships must evolve. What once was necessary at one stage of life becomes toxic in another if it does not grow. When they continue to treat you like someone who can't think, can't choose, can't lead, It's no longer care, it's containment. And hear me, God didn't bring you through decades of trials just to have someone else tell you how to live now. He brought you through so you could walk in peace, in clarity, in purpose, and in spiritual authority. You don't need to convince anyone anymore. You don't need to plead to be heard. You don't need to soften your dreams to fit inside someone else's box of fear. And if your decision makes someone uncomfortable, that's their work, not yours. If your freedom unsettles their need to control, that's not your burden to manage. Your only responsibility now is to walk with God in the light He's given you. So speak what's in your heart. Go where He leads. Build what He places in your hands. And if anyone tries to shut that down, whether with concern, with disapproval, or with manipulation, remember this. You were never called to live under someone else's ceiling. You were called to live under God's sky, wide open, unapologetically, and full of faith. Let the controllers talk. Let them question. Let them wrestle with your independence. But as for you, stand, speak, live, and never again apologize for being free. There is a sacred place in your life, deeper than your memories, older than your accomplishments. It's the place where your faith has lived. The quiet place where you whispered prayers when no one saw. The place where God met you in your darkest hour. The place where you were held, healed, and made whole, not by people, not by possessions, but by the unshakable presence of the living God. So, when someone mocks that, when someone rolls their eyes at your convictions, when they call your prayers fairy tales, your worship a crutch, your faith outdated, they are not just mocking you, they are mocking the one who carried you. And these are the most dangerous people of all in your later years, the faith mockers, because they don't come to argue with logic. They come to chip away at your hope. They ask questions not to learn, but to undermine. They sit in your home smirking when you thank God for your food. They stay silent when you speak of Jesus, hoping their disapproval will speak louder than your joy. But let me say this clearly, and without apology, your faith is not up for debate. It is the reason you're still here. It is the reason your heart has survived betrayals, grief, sickness, and silence. It is the anchor that held you when everything else let go. And no one, no matter how smart, successful, or close, has the right to tear it down. You've walked through valleys they've never seen. You've stood in fire they couldn't survive. You've cried tears in secret places that only heaven witnessed. And in those moments, it was not their intellect that lifted you, it was your faith. So why would you now allow their sarcasm to silence your testimony? You see, the older you get, the more eternity becomes real. The more deeply you reflect on legacy, on purpose, on what truly matters. You're not trying to impress anyone anymore. You're trying to finish well. And finishing well means guarding the sacred soil of your soul. The mockers will say, "I'm just being honest." They'll call it a different opinion, but you can feel it, can't you? That spirit of disrespect, that subtle pride that makes your belief feel foolish in your own home, and you're not imagining it. That discomfort in your spirit is discernment. That heaviness in their presence is not just emotional, it's spiritual tension. Because darkness always recoils at the light. So don't ignore it. Don't dismiss it as sensitivity. You have every right to protect the ground where your faith has grown. Not to argue, not to fight, but to preserve the peace you bled for. Faith mockers don't always shout. Sometimes it's just a smirk when you say, "Praise God." Sometimes it's a dismissive chuckle when you mention prayer. Sometimes it's a backhanded comment like, "I guess some people still need that crutch." But what they don't understand, what they'll never understand, is that this faith they mock has held your life together. It's not a crutch. It's your cornerstone. It's not weakness. It's warfare. It's not fantasy. It's the fire that refined you. And when they come with their cynicism, their logic, their pride, disguised as intellectual superiority, you don't have to defend your faith like it's fragile, because it isn't. Your faith has weathered storms they couldn't survive. Your belief has brought healing no doctor could explain. Your worship has lifted you from pits they've never dared to walk through. So no, you don't need their approval. You don't need their applause. And you certainly don't need their understanding to stand boldly in what God has done for you. What you do need is the courage to guard what's holy. Let's be clear, this isn't about disrespecting others who believe differently. This is about protecting your peace from those who delight in tearing down what you hold sacred. There's a difference. There are those who ask honest questions, who wrestle gently, who seek truth with humility. Those people are not mockers. They're seekers, and seekers are welcome. But those who sneer, who roll their eyes, who mock your testimony with casual cruelty, they're not seeking truth. They're trying to weaken yours. And you've come too far to let anyone's sarcasm chip away at what the Spirit of God has revealed to you. The Word says in Matthew 7-6, "Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn and tear you to pieces." That's not about hatred. That's about discernment. Your faith is a pearl. Your relationship with God is holy. Your testimony is sacred. And there are some people, yes, even family, who don't deserve unfiltered access to those parts of you anymore. Not because you hate them, but because you've learned the value of what God has given you. So when the mockers show up, maybe in the form of an old friend, a grown child, or a well-educated sibling, you don't have to argue. You don't have to shout, preach, or convince. You simply stand. Stand with your peace. Stand with your worship. Stand with your history with God. And let your life be the sermon they can't refute. Because while they're debating beliefs, you're living in the evidence. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when you stop needing to defend what God has already proven. When you've seen too much survived, too much been loved through, too much to let mockery steal your reverence. You've stood in the quiet hours of night whispering prayers no one heard but heaven. You've felt God's hand on your shoulder when the room was empty. You've witnessed miracles that logic could never explain. You've been comforted in grief, lifted in despair, and steadied when everything else was shaking. That is not a belief you hold. It's a reality you've lived. So when the faith mockers come, and they will, you don't need to get defensive. You don't need to explain every spiritual truth you've come to know through tears and time. What you need to do is protect your altar, because that's what your faith is, an altar. A place where sacrifice and surrender met. A place where brokenness turned into beauty. A place where God showed up again and again, proving himself faithful. And mockers, they don't just challenge ideas, they desecrate altars. They bring sarcasm into sacred spaces, and if you let them too close, they'll erode your atmosphere of peace. until your heart starts to feel like it has to defend what should be simply lived. Let them doubt. Let them scoff. Let them roll their eyes at your worship, because their opinion cannot rewrite what God has already written in your story. And don't be surprised when some of these people are the ones you love the most. A child who grew skeptical, a sibling who grew hardened, a friend who used to believe but now laughs when you do. You can still love them. You can still pray for them. But hear me, you do not have to give them unrestricted access to your spirit, because the soil of your soul is where your legacy lives. And if they trample on it with disbelief and mockery, you are not obligated to keep letting them in. This is your sacred season, the time where you stop entertaining debates and start living anchored, where you stop defending your faith and start displaying it through peace, through joy, through unwavering presence. Your faith doesn't need validation. It bears fruit. It produces life. It leaves a trail of healed wounds and hopeful mornings. And when it's all said and done, when the years have spoken and the body is tired, it won't be the arguments you remember. It will be the moments when faith held you together. So let the mockers talk. You just keep shining. Because in the end, the only approval that matters is the voice that says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And no amount of mockery can silence the one who has walked with God.